Welcome to my video. Why the increase in single men? There's been a steady and growing number of men who are single. These numbers increase with every year that passes. There are different reasons for why this phenomenon has occurred in different countries, and that's what I will be discussing in today's video. Men make up the large portion of dating app users, but most seem to remain single instead of finding long-term partners. The question is why? The answer is simple. Traditionally, men didn't have to do much. They courted the woman, they paid for the ring, and the woman did everything else. And the woman did most of the work in planning the wedding and in the home. In the past, expectations for men have been famously low. Consequently, men are lazy in dating, and so they don't put much effort into dating, nor into their own personal development. Women, on the other hand, constantly work on self-improvement and self-development, and so they just aren't willing to accept lazy, substandard men anymore. Women prefer men who are emotionally available, good communicators, and share similar values. And because men are not always the best at all of these things, women are simply ditching them. So why is it that men are failing to meet women's standards? Well, good communication, emotional intelligence, and availability are hardly strict criteria to help you find a great partner, but what they are is basic entry-level requirements for being a grown-up. If you don't possess these qualities, something has gone really wrong in your upbringing. Sadly, many men fall short in these areas, and it's because of this that they fail so dismally at relationships. Emotional skills are not taught to young boys and families. Most men are babied by their moms and allowed a free pass to behave as they please. Young girls are groomed to play into heterosexual male standards from a young age, but boys are rarely taught to respect women, let alone reach a higher standard when dating women or achieve self-development. Consequently, men feel they just have to show up, do the bare minimum, and they'll find a mate. So men have just fallen behind. Unfortunately for men, just showing up isn't enough anymore. The days where women had to marry are gone, and women want more out of life than partnering with a man who brings very little to the table. In the USA, 60% of undergraduate students today are female, and more than 58% of all graduate degrees are earned by women. With their greater education, women are now getting more jobs and more management jobs than men, and closing in on the earnings of men. Economists report that their wages are rising faster than those of men. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, among recent college graduates, women earn 97% of what their male peers earn. At the start of their careers, women actually out-earn men by a substantial margin for a number of college majors. Increasingly, education determines economic prospects, and education and earnings prescribe relationship prospects. And family functioning, thanks as much to social and emotional advantages as to the cognitive ones that stable adult relationships confer on the young, is now a significant determinant of educational attainment. Contemplating a partner's success, whether or not it was something in which they themselves had failed, led men to choose negative descriptions of themselves, although they said they felt fine. Women's self-esteem, by contrast, was unaffected by the performance of their partner, although a partner's achievement warmed their view of the relationship. There is some evidence that men automatically interpret a partner's success as their own relative failure. More than 500 young men responded to an online survey conducted by Psychology Today. When asked what bothers them most these days, many said, in the words of one 34-year-old, the fear that they will not be enough for the woman they love. We're scared that we won't have the ability to keep up, said a 29-year-old. The thing is that as women have improved themselves, their criteria for mate selection has advanced, and many are no longer willing to just shackle themselves to any old man for life. Women are increasingly viewing the picket-fenced picture of heterosexuality as a trap, and associating men with captivity. Marriage is no longer viewed as a prize that women need to attain to be accepted in society. In fact, given how many women are unhappily married, women have realized that marriage benefits men more than it benefits them, and so their views on what they want in relationships have changed. So it's unsurprising they're raising their standards and asking for something more from them. They don't necessarily want a husband because a husband represents so much work, and let's be clear, it is work for women to be married. In the average relationship, a woman's workload increases when she marries a man. She has to take care of everyone, and she often has very little time for things she enjoys. Men, on the other hand, get someone who does everything for them while still living a bachelor lifestyle and taking on very little responsibility. Small wonder that the smart women are shunning relationships and marriage in favor of being single. While some women will say, "Who's going to take care of you when you age?" Or, "How will you cope alone?" Or, "Won't you be lonely?" Or, "What about kids? Don't you want to be a mom?" The smart, self-assured woman will realize that she can be fulfilled without all these things that we have been brainwashed to believe will make us happy. The fact is, your kids will leave the home and fly away. Your husband will probably just be another dependent annoyance. You may land up being really lonely in your marriage, and not every woman wants to be a mom. Who knew? The real shocker is that most older people end up being very much alone when they age, and that can be a result of many things. Kids leaving the country, kids dying, partners dying or leaving, and even estrangement from kids. We don't all make it to the end of our lives with someone to hold our hand, and so the trick is understanding that at the end of the day, we all land up alone. So, is marriage beneficial to men or women? First of all, I'd like to just point out that the default gender of all humans starts off being female, and then testosterone, which is actually part of being male, is actually a disservice to men. It means that men don't have self-control. From early on, they have more discipline and learning problems than girls do. The challenge for every society has always been to restrain men and get them to commit to and support women and children, which is why marriage is so important for and has a greater effect on males than on females. Commitment to a partner, data has long shown, helps self-control among men. Married men commit fewer crimes, earn more money, take better care of themselves, feel happier, and live longer than men who are unattached. Commitment in turn stabilizes families, which boosts the well-being and behavior of children, especially boys, and sets them up to succeed in education and in the job market. The big problem is the lack of maturity in men. The complaints of women, especially at selected schools, are that men act like they're in high school and they don't have it together, and these comments are not losers' comments. They reflect a true and growing reality for women. The immaturity in men is something I've also seen firsthand during my dating years. Men just seem clueless about dating norms and rituals and about partnership and acting with maturity. As gender roles expand for both sexes, many men are stuck in an outdated stereotype of what a male is and what a male does. Even among younger men, guys are still not doing a proportionate share of housework or family work. And studies actually show that men continue to have 10% more leisure time than their partners. Men are just not pulling their weight, and women are tired of doing all the work. We've raised girls to conquer the world, but we haven't told boys the same thing. So increasingly, marriage is a hell no for many women. And the fact is that growing numbers of women just don't want to be miserable like their moms and grandmothers were. They don't want to pretend their marriage is happy. They don't want to do all the work and pretend that they have a partner when they don't. I know men will say those women were happily married, but actually many weren't, and it's just that they couldn't get divorced. I'm really not sure how not being able to get divorced means that a woman is happy in a man's mind, but I think men are so desperate to convince themselves that women were happy when many just were not. Moms also baby their sons, and what that means is most men are all but useless in the home, looking to the wife to do everything for them. Women look at their husband and see man-children that need to be babied, and the more babying women have to do, the more pathetic their husbands are, the less they actually desire the men sexually. When you're young, everything you learn about marriage is based on the marriages of people around you. And there were a few observations that I made about marriage from a young age. And these were, men were babied and women did everything in marriage. Men were helpless, they couldn't cook, clean, and they never did much of the parenting, and it was really the women who made all the sacrifices. And there was no real love or romance in marriage. It was just boring and all about more work for the women. You can imagine that I never really liked this idea, and so from a young age, marriage and all it involved really held no appeal for me. All the marriages I got to see didn't really seem to be that wonderful. There was no affection, there was no romance, and there was definitely no real partnership. So why do it? Women tend to settle. This is what I noticed quite early on. My first boyfriend, who I spent weekends with, barely had a conversation with me, knew almost nothing about me, was never romantic with me, never had any deep, real conversations with me, and yet after 2 years this man wanted me to move in with him. I remember looking at him and realizing that this man didn't know a thing about me. He barely touched me, he wasn't affectionate with me, he spent more time with his mom than he did with me. He did the bare minimum, and yet he wanted to move in with me. And I remember looking at this man and thinking, no. I remember thinking that this is not what I want for my life. A dead relationship where this man doesn't connect with me. The fact is that women settle. They settle because of pressure from family and friends. They settle because of their biological clock. They settle because of fear of being alone. And they pick any man and then realize how utterly miserable they are. I didn't want to be one of those women. So the question is marriage a crowning achievement? Marriage, from my perspective, is awful for women's happiness. You morph into someone whose needs and wants and self-actualization come last. Your husband and kids take precedence. You're a maid, a sex toy who doesn't get quality sex, a cook, and you're the one making all the sacrifices. If that life doesn't suck the joy out of you, then you weren't alive to begin with. Even pushing a baby out of my body isn't going to make me so euphorically happy that I'm going to forget how miserable being with some man who just shares space with me but doesn't connect with me makes me feel. I also can't really associate with women congratulating each other for being wives and mom like that's some crowning achievement. Am I missing something here? And if that doesn't kill you, there's all this crap about keeping up with the Joneses. Who needs that crap? And who cares about the damn Joneses? How could this not be fun? So dating sucks no matter what age you are. I look at my dating prospects and they were dismal. At 15, a 22-year-old in the army met me 3 times for a sum total of about an hour and wanted to marry me. We barely knew each other, so you can understand why I wasn't all that keen. At 22, I dated my first boyfriend. Over the course of 2 years, this man barely spent much time with me. We spent every weekend together, but we had no heart-to-heart chats. He wasn't romantic. He barely took me on dates. He made no real effort. But after 2 years, he wanted to move in with me. I wasted 2 years, but to be honest, I had nothing better to do, and I had met no one interesting while studying or working. So I suppose I just thought I might as well date him. And then this man cheated on me and moved in with a woman who held knives to his throat and who he's now married to. What the hell? And then after I broke off this relationship with him, I met a guy who again barely spent time with me, didn't take me on dates, only spent time with me when he was around other friends and barely communicated with me. That obviously didn't go anywhere. This man was someone my aunt knew. God knows why they thought we would be a good match. I can only think they were desperate to set me up with anyone, even this guy. And then I met a guy who was studying architecture. Never spoke a word to me, but sent me roses and told his whole family about me. yet we hadn't even been on a date or spoken to each other. I was quite spooked by this. And then a friend of mine who was living with his girlfriend and who had just had a baby with her tried to get me into bed. Ew. And then I met a policeman who was barely making ends meet and was clearly going nowhere fast. Also, not a good prospect. And then, at 26, I met a guy at a barbecue. He was interesting to talk to, but clearly not interested in being in a relationship. He was in his 30s, still single, studying law at university, and intriguing. God knows what I was thinking. After this experience, the quality of men I met worsened, and it's so depressing that all I'm going to say is this. One of the guys I met at a barbecue through a friend, it turns out that after we dated for 3 months, I found out that he'd been dating someone else. He stole from me, he lied to me, he cheated on me, and he even hit me once. He left me at a wedding that we were meant to go to together by myself. He didn't arrive. He just left me there. He was meant to be the best man, and he didn't arrive. It was because he was with this other woman that he was cheating on me with. I made this man pay back the money, confronted him about the cheating, and ended the relationship. This man's own father warned me against dating his son. If most women go through these bad dating experiences, you can see how many land up staying single, unless, of course, they just settle and they just stick with bad men, which is what many of them do, and that's why many of them land up divorced. You'll often hear men use the term wifey material. So let's look at what the definition is of wifey material. The Urban Dictionary brings a more urban definition and notes that she's educated, can hold her own in a conversation, is generous but takes no shit. She'll put your needs first and will give you breathing room as a man. She doesn't always have to look like a supermodel either, because when those looks fade, she will have something valuable like her wifely duties to back it up. Society conditions women to be wife material, but this is not so for male children who are not taught to be good men in the society they're raised in. Right from birth, the girl child is raised by her mother to become a good wife when she grows up. Unfortunately, you don't see the same energy put into equipping boys to become good husband material. When the woman comes into marriage after having been properly groomed, she meets up with a man who lacks information on how to handle or be with a woman, and that's why relationships just don't work. Sadly, misogynistic society has defined wifey material as a woman who's oppressed, not empowered, and easy to control. Biblically, a wife is a helper who should help a man achieve his vision. The woman is neglected here, and the man is topmost of everything. Well, for many women, that's a really bad deal, and so more and more women are walking away from being wifey material, a term used by men who bring nothing to the table and just really want to use a woman for her resources. What are men bringing to the table? That's the question women should ask. And for too long, the focus has only been on what women offer in a relationship and not in what men offer. And honestly, men have been offering less and less as every year has passed. So let's look at the conflict that is prevalent in men. It really doesn't help that men are aimless, looking for the woman in their lives to give them purpose, which is really too much pressure for women. Why must women continuously fix men? It's too much pressure and it's very unfair. What women need is for men to break the gender roles and step up and do the work women do to be good partners. The time where men could sit back and get away with doing very little is over. Women are not willing to accept this anymore. Many young men now report that they're bewildered that women aren't helping them move to the new model of masculinity that those very women say they want. Women are tired, though, of always being the ones to support men when men give very little support in return. Men desire to be understood in relationships, but the problem is that they don't seem to attempt to understand women or meet them halfway, and women obviously resent this. At the core of it all is the male's inability to be comfortable with all of who he is, the strength and the weakness. Women respect men who respect them and who communicate openly, but women are sexually turned off by men who are needy. Needy men give women baby vibes, and no woman is sexually aroused by a man baby. So if you start crying and say all you want is someone to love you, a woman is going to interpret this as needy and run a mile. Trust me, I know a man I went on one date with. He did this, and it really didn't attract me to him. Men are confused. They're conflicted. They want a woman who's their intellectual equal, but they're afraid of women like that. They want a woman that can dominate, but then they hate her for being weak. It's an ambivalence that goes back to a man's relationship with his mother, source of his life, center of his universe, object of both his fear and his love. That's a post by Diane Froloff. The fact is that for a very long time women have just made excuses for men. When men don't step up, women make excuses. Women pretend to be happy when they're not. The thing that needs to change is women need to stop dating men expecting men to change. Date the man in front of you. He's not going to change. If you don't like him as is, then don't stay with him. If any man doesn't provide what you need in the early stages of dating, you can be sure that he won't be providing these things later on, because the early stages of dating are when he should be trying to impress the women he's dating. Men also need to stop dating women to replace their moms and step up and actually be partners. If you can't be a real partner and are looking for someone to baby you, then the fact is you really aren't ready for a relationship. The problem is, women think he will change. He won't. The mistake that men make is thinking she'll never leave. She will. I think women are conditioned to stand by their man and watch them make it to the top. But most men never believe the person they get into a relationship with is going to rise any higher than she is at when they meet. It takes a very special, evolved person to be able to deal with change in a relationship. Then we have something else that's an issue, and this is moms who baby their sons, and this is a bit of a pandemic actually. Moms tend to baby their sons and run around after them, taking care of them and making them believe that it's normal for a woman to cater to them. This only serves to make these men less attractive partners for women who don't want to be running around taking care of a man, and who in fact want a partner who actually wants to share everything equally. By equally, I mean everything should be shared. Childcare, chores, cooking and cleaning. Trust me, I and many other women don't want to be a maid and babysitter to a grown man. There's nothing less appealing than taking on a man-child, and unfortunately, many men have been raised to be nothing more than grown children, unable to independently contribute to a real relationship, and instead looking for a woman to take over from their mom. Moms even admit to favoring their sons over their daughters and making the daughters work harder than the boys, thereby creating useless men that women don't want to date or partner with. Well done, moms. Your little boy is going to be all yours forever and will likely die alone. Unfortunately, another thing that contributes to this whole situation between men and women is mothers who favor their sons over their daughters. It creates a large amount of issues with both sexes. I'm going to refer to an article in The Guardian. Mothers are more critical of their daughters than their sons and admit to having a stronger bond with their little boys, according to research. While they praise particular characteristics in their sons, seeing these boys as being funny, cheeky, and playful, mothers admit that they're likely to denigrate their daughters for showing similar attributes, referring to their daughters as stroppy or argumentative. The 2,500-strong survey by parenting website NetMums found that although almost one half of mothers say they know it's wrong to treat boys and girls differently, 90% admit they do exactly that. Mothers are, the research shows, twice as likely to be more critical of their daughters than their sons, while over half admitted that they feel a stronger tie to their son than their daughter. The research shows that mums type their children according to gender, with boys being labelled with far more positive traits than their sisters. More than 1 in 5 mothers questioned admitted that they turn a blind eye to behavior of boys for which they would reprimand their girls. Chrissy Duff, a psychotherapeutic counselor, said this combination of a more critical upbringing and attributed negative personality types can have a long-lasting and serious effect on daughters. Women in particular seem to carry the feelings of parental disapproval and negative typing into adulthood. The experience of receiving more negative reinforcements for stepping out of line than men can lead women to view themselves as more needing of censure. This could be why women are more self-critical than men, who tend to have a more happy-go-lucky attitude when it comes to making mistakes. As a woman, I can tell you that the last thing I want to do is take on a man who has been babied by his mom so much he's useless in the home and wants to be pandered to. This kind of man is making himself extinct as a partner, and more and more women are not willing to take this on in a man. The work women have to do in relationships is enormous because, to add to the fact that their boyfriends or husbands are not house trained, these men are also unable to forge decent close friendships with other men. Most women become their partners, therapists, and emotional punching bag, acting as a therapist and having to emotionally coach their partners who are too afraid to admit that they have any feelings at all. It's exhausting. Women are suffering from anxiety and exhaustion from all the work that they have to do in relationships that really aren't fun. For generations, men have been taught to reject traits like gentleness and sensitivity, leaving them without the tools to deal with internalized anger and frustration, and so women have to pick up the pieces and try to fix the damage, often at their expense. The term emotional gold digger is now used to describe men who bleed women dry of emotional resources. While women read countless self-help books, listen to podcasts, seek out career advisors, and turn to female friends for advice and support, and spend a small fortune on therapists to deal with old wounds and current problems, the men in their lives simply rely on the women for everything. Men drain women emotionally, and women who were taught from a young age to pander to men usually do, until one day they realize they are on a losing wicket, getting nothing from their partners and doing everything. But the older women get, the less willing they seem to be a man's everything, not only because we become more confident, wise, and tired with age, but because our responsibilities pile up with each passing year. Women are always expected to take care of everyone, and it's just not fair. Also, men don't seem to know how to cultivate real friendships. When they retire, they expect their wives to be their entertainment and are angry when their wives have lives that they cultivated over the years. Most men will say they don't need therapy because that's what their wives and girlfriends are for. No. Men need to realize their partners are not there to fix them. They need to do the work to fix themselves and allow their partners to enjoy a relationship with them without the constant work. Men and loneliness. Unfortunately, men become violent and act out rather than talking about their feelings. The persistent idea that seeking therapy is some form of weakness has produced a generation of men suffering from symptoms like anger, irritability, and aggressiveness. Because not only are they less likely than women to pursue mental health help, but once they do, they really have a hard time expressing their emotions. This is so common that there's even a technical term for it: normative male alexithymia. Only 5% of men seek outpatient mental health services despite feeling lonelier than ever before. In a recent British study, 2.5 million men admitted to having no close friends. What's more, men conceal pain and illness at much higher rates than women and are 3 times more likely than women to die from suicide. Black men face an added set of barriers, including systemic discrimination, racial stereotypes, and cultural stigma against mental illness. The problem is that men aren't taught to listen and to hold a safe space for emotions, theirs and other people's. Men feel they need to fix everything. Opening up and showing emotion is a huge act of courage, particularly for men. Men have to stop calling each other gay or pussy when they show emotion, because if they don't stop doing this, they'll never be able to learn how to be comfortable with emotion and connect in the way they need to with women. Men are taught the remedy to heartbreak is to get drunk with your buddies, objectify women, and go out and get laid. So basically, distance yourself from your feelings and channel them into an aggressive outlet. This message is a really bad message and it needs to stop. The other negative message that tell men that they can't show feelings also need to stop. The sad thing for me is that men feel so much shame about being human, as if they aren't able to be anything other than impenetrable. And until this mindset changes, women won't be able to find a safe space to really connect with a man on an intimate level emotionally. Men become consumed with shame for showing signs of weakness, since vulnerability is unfortunately still perceived as a weakness instead of a strength. Having hard conversations that involve vulnerability is something men often try to avoid. Usually men use sex to connect, but women don't feel comfortable connecting sexually with men until they have connected emotionally, while men use sex to connect emotionally. There's a big disconnect here between what women need and what men need. Men also seem to think that if they have a close emotional bond with a woman, it must be followed by sex, but women can be friends with men without making things sexual. So if we're going to help men to connect with women, we need to understand what women want and need. I'm female, so I think I should be able to give you some perspective on this. I'd say that men need to stop looking for a wife who will solve their problems and do their laundry, and look instead for a real, genuine partnership, one that includes real love and equality. Women want to be valued in a relationship, not just used as a maid and for breeding and sex services, which generally is what men have consigned them to for hundreds of years. Women want men who are emotionally mature, able to be genuine without being clingy and needy. Women are no longer able to be everything to some man, the cook, the mom, the therapist, the sex kitten, and run around doing everything for everyone. Men need to start stepping up to the plate and offering something that makes women want to be partners with them. And false promises aren't going to cut it, because women will walk away when they discover that you aren't genuine. There's a big problem in China. China has more men than women, and this has created a gender imbalance. Of the 12 million babies born last year, there were 111.3 boys for every 100 girls. Traditionally, Chinese culture puts great value on boys while girls are shunned. Pairing this with a one-child policy meant that a couple only had one chance to have a boy. Because of a cultural norm that places a premium on boys, the policy's victims frequently included first-conceived children that happened to be girls. Over 3 decades, China's one-child policy condemned approximately 37 million Chinese girls deemed unwanted or surplus to abortion, infanticide, abandonment, and human trafficking. This is besides the estimated 400 million abortions, boys or girls, which were made since the criminal policy was enacted. Only 1 in 4 Chinese men will ever get married in 2030, and where families only have one son who has no chance of marrying, their family line will end when their son dies, and this is all a result of females favoring sons over girls, and because of the one-child policy. This was the huge price families paid for prioritizing men over women, men who will now grow old alone and who won't be able to have families. Unfortunately, the damage is done for China. The harsh economic conditions mean that many can no longer afford to have more than one child, and the imbalance in men versus women doesn't seem as it will ever be resolved. But it's the image of sexually deprived migrant men that features prominently in the state's anxious imagination. There's an obvious link between angry young men and social unrest, and history points to a connection between frustrated marital aspirations and upheaval, such as the tension caused by the demonization of poor unmarried men by the Qing dynasty ruling class. Because male children are seen as more valuable, as well as more likely to support their parents in old age, some parents chose to have a son over a daughter through sex-selective abortion, female infanticide, and neglect. One widely cited study estimates the number of female children removed from the population between 1980 and 2000 at 8.5 million. 94% of unmarried people in China are men. The result? Large numbers of surplus men who will likely never get married. In fact, one study has predicted that by 2030, 1 in 5 Chinese men in their 30s will never have married, while another states that 94% of unmarried people in China are men. Out of China's population of 1.4 billion people, there are nearly 34 million more men than women, the equivalent of almost the entire population of California or Poland, who will never find wives and only rarely have sex, or maybe never have sex. China's official one-child policy, in effect from 1979 to 2015, was a huge factor in creating this imbalance, as millions of couples were determined that their child should be a son. India, a country that has deeply held preferences for sons and male heirs, has an excess of 37 million men, according to its most recent census. The number of newborn female babies compared with men has continued to plummet, even as the country grows more developed and prosperous. The imbalance creates a surplus of bachelors and exacerbates human trafficking, both for brides and possibly prostitution. It takes a house, savings, and a good job to win a bride. Many Chinese men are working harder, taking more dangerous or unpleasant jobs just to get ahead. Parents are also trying to give their sons a leg up financially. Having sons was once a hedge against poverty and old age, hence the parents' preferences for boys over girls. But now, elderly parents are sacrificing to help their sons appear marriageable and to support sons who cannot find a bride. Daughters-in-law were once expected to look after their husband's parents. In millions of families, because of the lack of women, that's no longer possible. Tens of thousands of foreign women are flocking to China for marriage, pushed by poverty at home and sucked in by China's shortage of women. Chinese men surf websites that offer foreign brides and may wind up paying upwards of $8,000 for marriage tours to find a wife. For the brides, it's a huge gamble. They are lured with promises of work, and some are effectively trapped and trafficked into marriage. In their new families, daughters-in-law occupy the lowest status. I don't know why any woman would go for this deal. It's a completely bad deal for the female. One 32-year-old woman interviewed in the Cambodian capital Phnom Penh said she had been enticed to come to China with the promise of a factory job, but when she landed she was forced to marry a man she didn't like. My husband said to me, "You are my slave. I bought you. If I want, I can do anything to you." Her new family locked her in the house to prevent her from fleeing, she said. Her husband demanded sex four times a day. If she refused, she was beaten. Finally, she had a baby girl. 7 days after birth, her husband demanded sex again, and when she refused, beat her, she said. 2 years later, she recalled she had a miscarriage, was denied medical treatment by her husband's family, and almost died. For 3 years, the woman had not called her family back home in Cambodia because I didn't want my mom to worry, and because she felt ashamed she hadn't been able to send any money home. This is extremely sad and just actually goes to show how abusive some of the Chinese families are. At this year's 2 sessions, suggestions on the crackdown on the trafficking of women and children largely went along 2 tracks. One was imposing harsher punitive measures with deterrence in mind. This includes meting out equal penalties for both buyers and sellers, and even imposing the death penalty on the buyers of trafficked women and children. 2 is resolving past cases and strengthening follow-up assistance to the victims, including checking back on crimes committed 20 years ago, and having the marriages of the victims annulled. So what is the consequence of having more men than women on the planet in any country? The imbalance drives up saving rates and drives down consumption, artificially inflating certain property values, and there's increases in violent crime, trafficking, or prostitution in a growing number of locations in China. Among men, loneliness and depression are widespread, villages are emptying out, men are learning to cook and perform other chores relegated to women. I don't think that's a bad thing. Bachelors are furiously building houses in China to attract wives, and prices are soaring. But otherwise they're not spending, and that in turn fuels China's huge trade surplus. In India, there's the opposite effect. Because brides are scarce, families are under less pressure to save for expensive dowries. Trafficking of brides is on the rise. Foreign women are being recruited and lured to China, effectively creating similar imbalances in China's neighbors. With the increase in men has come a surge in sexual crime in India and concerns about a rise in other crimes in both countries. Harassment of schoolgirls in India has in some towns sparked an effort to push back, but at the cost of restricting them to more protected lives. This is very sad. The women are paying the price for the bad behavior of the men. The growing number of eligible men who cannot find brides has had a profound impact on the age-old rhythms of family life. Adult sons live with their mothers, in some cases their grandmothers. Indian and Chinese women who showed a marked preference for sons are growing old. They are still burdened with cooking and cleaning for their adult sons, and the stress affects their house. I've cried so much I can't see anymore, says one. Reading about the termination of female babies is just making me incredibly sad. And I feel like the fallout with men being lonely and men being single is because of this really horrible practice of aborting and terminating pregnancies of girls. And I think it's something that was bound to happen. The Indian government has tried to ban selective diagnostic testing, but still these stupid families do this. They abort their female children. How can you be so idiotic? Many families believe it's better to abort their unborn girls because it's hard to protect them from sexual violence later in life, and parents will have to pay pricey dowries when the girls are married. Again, have we noticed that the bad behavior of men is affecting women on the planet? In India, a nation of 1.3 billion, males outnumber females by 37 million. And whose fault is that? Men and women in marriages who constantly push for boys over girls. In a country all too familiar with crimes against women, packs of men fueled by cheap local liquor often take to the street to chase and pressure young women. Bad behavior. Men who have not been taught how to behave well by their parents. I foresee a time when women will either leave India or move away from men entirely. That time is coming. When men behave badly, women will leave. Gosra Tapa Danhina village is a small community of nearly 3,000, mostly farming communities who grow corn, wheat, and millet. Crimes against women have risen in the state by 127% in the last decade. It's absolutely disgusting. There's also a decline in people wanting to marry in Japan. In 2019, the New York Times reported that a similar cultural shift was taking place in Japan, with more women opting out of marriage to avoid facing the double standard of managing housework and childcare while juggling a career. 1 in 4 Japanese in their 30s say they have no plans to get married. Analysts say that's due to increasing financial pressures and a desire to live without social obligations. According to the Cabinet Office's 2022 gender report, 25.4% of women in their 30s and 26.5% of men in the same age group say they do not want to get married. Slightly more than 19% of men in their 20s and 14% of women similarly have no plans to wed. Women taking part in the survey said they are shying away from marriage because they enjoy their freedom, have fulfilling careers, and do not want the burdens of the traditional housewife, such as household chores, raising children, and looking after elderly parents. Men said they also enjoy personal freedoms, but many additionally said other motivators for remaining single include concerns over job insecurity and not being able to earn enough money to sustain a family. Japan's birth rate may be falling because there are fewer good opportunities for young people, and especially men, in the country's economy. In a country where men are still widely expected to be breadwinners and support families, a lack of good jobs may be creating a class of men who don't marry and have children because they and their potential partners know that they just can't afford to. The birth rate is down, even the coupling rate is down, and people will say the number one reason is economic insecurity. Since the post-war years, Japan had a tradition of regular employment, as labor experts commonly call it, in which men started their careers at jobs that gave them good benefits, dependable raises, and the understanding that if they worked hard, they could keep their jobs until retirement. Now, about 40% of the Japanese workforce is irregular, meaning they don't work for companies where they have stable jobs for their whole careers, and instead piece together temporary and part-time jobs with low salaries and no benefits. But more, Japan's work life causes stress and burnout, and the same can be said for a lot of countries. Some of the young men in irregular jobs become what is called net cafe refugees, people who live in the tiny cubicles available for rent overnight at Japanese internet cafes. Shiko Fukada, a photographer, has documented the life of these refugees. Others with irregular jobs live with their parents or go on welfare. Irregular employees earn an average of about $1,800 a month, but spend much of that money on rent, paying back their college loans, and paying into Japan's social security program. This really doesn't leave them much to live on. Japan also has a long culture of overwork. There's even a Japanese word, karoshi, for death by overwork, but it has worsened since the Great Recession, as companies have realized that good jobs are hard to find in Japan, and they push their employees even harder. The result is that even Japan's good jobs can be brutal. People who hold them may earn enough money to support families, but they often don't have much time to date or do anything but work, sleep, and eat, and many are so stressed that they can barely function. So the question really is, what should men do? I think some of the issues are things that men can address, and I'm going to deal with those. But there are obviously other issues that are even larger that have to do with unethical work practices and government overtaxing people. That all needs to be changed by government at the top. But men do have some options. They can do nothing and face life being single. That's a valid option. They can offer women more than the come be my wife and live a life of servitude to me and my kids option. Men can and should level up their mental health game. It means seeing intimacy, romance, and emotional connection as worthy of time and effort, and men can learn how to close the relationship skills gap. At the end of the day, we all want healthy relationships fueled by mutual respect. Regardless of gender, respecting your partner looks like learning each other's communication style, in addition to working towards healing from past wounds. And yes, sometimes it might mean that one or both partners need to actually go to therapy. What can governments do? Well, it's clear that governments' overburdening of taxation and high property prices and high education costs and all sorts of knock-on effects are causing people to stop having kids and even stop getting married. So it's up to governments to incentivize people to have children by, amongst other things, reducing taxes. Let's be clear. People are taxed on their income and then taxed again through VAT and then taxed again when they die through inheritance tax. This is effectively being taxed 3 times on the same income, which is unethical and needs to end. Governments need to stop this unethical taxation and only tax people once on income at low tax rates. This would go a long way towards meaning that people have sufficient income to take care of kids and live decent lives, which would mean that they would want to have children. High taxes and too many taxes essentially make it unaffordable for people to marry and have children. They can't afford to save, they can't afford to buy homes, and there's no incentive to couple up, be married, or have children. Governments need to also abolish property and inheritance taxes and land taxes. That's the only way that they're really going to make it attractive for people to be able to afford to have kids going forward and to create a life that is worth living. And so governments have a huge responsibility to stop this culture of fleecing people for taxes.